For as long as people could remember, Daniel Mercer's voice carried weight. In boardrooms, it was firm and decisive. At conferences, it echoed with inspiration. But at home, for reasons he himself never fully confronted, that voice often vanished into silence. His wife, Claire, had long stopped waiting for bedtime conversations, and his teenage daughter, Ella, found it easier to text him from across the dinner table than speak face to face. Then came the morning that would change everything. Was supposed to be a routine surgery minor operation to remove a benign mass from Daniel's throat. In and out in a day, the doctor had said. But when Daniel woke, something was wrong. His throat ached, yes, but more than that, his words were trapped. He tried to speak, but all that came out was air. Panic bubbled in his chest. He tried again. Still nothing. Claire squeezed his hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "They said it might take a while." But it didn't take a while. Days turned into weeks. The doctors called it temporary vocal paralysis. But that word, temporary, began to feel less like a promise and more like a cruel joke. Daniel couldn't yell at traffic, couldn't lead meetings, couldn't even say "I love you" to his daughter. The empire he'd built felt like it was slipping through his fingers, not just his company, but his identity. He was a man who used words as tools, and now his toolbox was empty. Claire did her best. She brought home a whiteboard for him to write on. She made soups and set them beside him wordlessly. Ella, guarded as ever, kept her distance. Daniel watched her through the glass doors of the living room, headphones always in, eyes darting to her phone. He tried to return to work remotely, typing his ideas into long documents, using software that read his words aloud in a robotic voice. But it wasn't the same. His employees grew stiff around him. Even his assistant Linda, whom he trusted like a sister, seemed unsure how to look at him now. He was still the CEO on paper, but in the hearts of his people, he felt like a ghost. And then one night, Daniel stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush hanging limply in his hand. He stared at his reflection, eyes heavy with something he hadn't dared name until now. Grief. He wasn't just grieving his voice. He was grieving all the years he'd wasted not using it where it mattered most. The next morning, Claire found him at the kitchen table with a notepad. On it, he had written, "Find someone who can help me speak again, not just at work, at home." It was the first thing he'd asked for since the surgery. That's when Claire reached out to someone who would unknowingly become the most important person in Daniel's healing, Dr. Lena Park, a speech-language pathologist with a quiet demeanor and a gentle strength that could melt stone. What happened next? Well, it changed everything. If you're still listening, thank you for being here. This story isn't just about losing a voice, it's about finding the courage to use it where it matters most. If you've ever held back from saying something that needed to be said, this one's for you. The clinic wasn't far, tucked between a florist and a quiet coffee shop on a sleepy street Daniel had never paid attention to before. Claire drove him there on a grey Tuesday morning. The sun didn't break through the clouds, but somehow, the day felt significant. Dr. Lena Park met them in the waiting room. She was younger than Daniel expected, maybe mid-30s, with calm eyes and a tone that suggested she'd seen storms and knew how to guide people through them. She didn't shake his hand. Instead, she gave a soft nod and said, "Hi, Daniel. I'm glad you came." Her voice was gentle, not in pity, but in presence. They entered a room that didn't feel clinical at all. No sterile white lights, no cold chairs. Instead, a couch, a small table with stacked books, a few plants, and a large window that let in muted light. Daniel sat, notebook in hand, and Claire waited outside. Lena took a seat across from him. "I'm not going to ask you to try speaking yet," she said. "We'll start with something simpler." She handed him a stack of emotion cards, each one with a different face on it. Sadness, frustration, hope, guilt. Circle the ones that feel closest to you right now. Daniel hesitated. This wasn't what he expected. He'd pictured mouth exercises, maybe some breathing drills, but emotions. That felt too raw too soon. Still, he picked up a pen and began circling. Frustration, guilt, guilt, guilt. Lena noticed the repetition but didn't say anything. Instead, she asked, "Tell me about your voice, not the one you lost, but the one you used to have." Daniel paused, his pen hovering in the air. Slowly, he began to write. "I was clear, direct, respected. People listened." Lena read it and nodded, and at home, his hand hovered again. Then, after a long moment, he wrote, quiet, distant, absent. There, it was. They didn't need to say more that day. Lena introduced him to a series of exercises designed to reconnect breath with sound. Humming, gentle, vocal fry, lip trills, simple, nearly silent things, but each one, in its own way, felt like a pebble tossed into a still lake. Progress was slow. By the second week, Daniel could make faint vowel sounds. Claire noticed he was sitting straighter. Ella didn't say much, but once, as she passed him in the hallway, she paused and said, "Mom said you're working with someone." "That's cool." It wasn't much, but to Daniel, it was everything. One afternoon, Lena asked him to bring in something personal, to read aloud something from his life before. Daniel brought an old speech he'd given at a leadership conference. It was bold, commanding. As he read the first line aloud, broken, raspy, nearly inaudible, he stopped. Tears welled in his eyes. He set the paper down. Lena sat quietly. "It's okay," she said. "That voice served you once. But you're building a new one now, one that doesn't just command others, one that connects." He didn't try to finish the speech. Instead, he asked for a new assignment at home that night. He wrote a letter to Ella, a real letter. He didn't know if he'd ever be able to say the words aloud, but the act of writing them made something shift. "I know I haven't always been there. I don't want to be that kind of dad anymore." He placed it on her desk, unsure if she'd read it. The next morning, it was gone. There was no reply. But that night, when he sat on the couch, Ella came and sat next to him. She didn't say a word, just opened her laptop and leaned against his shoulder. He didn't need a voice to feel heard, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel Mercer felt like a father again. By the third month, Daniel could form a few words, a soft, breathy hello, a whisper of thanks, and sometimes a shaky yes. They weren't perfect, but they were his. He began carrying around a small notepad less, and using his voice, however fragile, more. Lena shifted their focus. Now that Daniel's vocal cords were regaining some strength, she asked him a different kind of question. "What's the hardest thing you've never said?" The answer didn't come quickly. He stared at the question scribbled on the whiteboard in front of him. So many things had gone unsaid in his life. Apologies, regrets, affection. He thought of his own father, a man of few words who believed showing up at the dinner table was love enough. Maybe that silence had been passed down like an inheritance. Daniel reached for the pen and slowly wrote, "I'm sorry." Lena nodded, almost expecting it. "For what?" she asked. He hesitated again, then added, "For choosing work over family. For letting pride speak louder than love. For being absent while I was present." The session ended quietly. Lena handed him a simple assignment. Say it out loud, even if no one is in the room. At home, Daniel waited until Claire had gone to bed. He stepped into the living room, turned off the lights, and stood in the center of the space where so many words had gone unspoken. The silence was thick. He took a breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered. It was barely a sound, but it cracked something open inside him. The next morning, Claire was in the kitchen making coffee when she felt his presence behind her. He gently touched her shoulder, and when she turned, he met her eyes and mouthed the words again, this time louder. "Sorry." Claire didn't cry. She didn't say much at all. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. And in that quiet morning moment, forgiveness didn't need a grand gesture. Just a few honest words and a heart willing to listen. Later that week, Lena asked if he'd be ready to bring his family in for a session. Daniel paused. He still felt vulnerable, his voice weak, his emotions easily tipped, but he said yes. The session was held on a Thursday afternoon. Claire came first, then Ella, headphones tucked away. They sat on the same couch Daniel had once faced alone. Lena invited them to share one thing they wished the other knew. Claire spoke first. Her voice trembled as she said, "I missed you, even when you were home." Ella followed, slower. "I got used to not needing you. I didn't like that." Daniel cleared his throat. "It still hurts sometimes to speak, but this was different, necessary. I want to do better," he rasped. 3 pairs of eyes filled with tears, each for different reasons. Lena gave them space, then gently said, "Healing takes time, but it starts here with truth." When they left the clinic that day, Daniel didn't feel fixed, but he did feel human. At dinner that night, they sat around the table together. The TV was off. No one reached for their phones. Ella looked up and asked, "Can you help me with my science project tomorrow?" Daniel smiled, voice rough but steady. "Yes, I'd like that. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was everything. It had been nearly 6 months since Daniel last set foot in the office. Not through a screen. Not from the muted silence of his home, but physically inside the glass tower that bore the name of the company he had built from scratch. He stood in the lobby for a full minute before stepping inside. His breath caught a little when the receptionist looked up and smiled in surprise. "Mr. Mercer, welcome back." He nodded, offered a soft smile, and lifted a hand in acknowledgement. His voice wasn't ready for conversations just yet, like this, but he had come to try. The building felt different now. The hum of conversation, the rhythm of shoes on tile, the muffled sounds of meetings behind glass doors. It was alive in a way he hadn't noticed before. He used to walk these halls like a man on a mission, blinders on, eyes always on the next pitch, the next milestone. Now, every face he passed felt like a question. Linda, his longtime assistant, met him at the elevator. "You didn't tell anyone you were coming," she whispered, and for a moment, there was tension then warmth. She embraced him. He wrote in his notebook, "I needed to see it, needed to feel it again." Linda nodded. "Come on. I saved your office just the way." It was the door to his office, opened with a familiar creak. The books were still lined up on the shelf, his name still etched on the glass, but everything felt quieter. Or maybe he was just listening more. Daniel sat at his desk and looked out the window. For years, this view had represented success. Now, it felt more like perspective. Over the next few days, he came in more often, not to lead meetings or deliver keynotes, but to listen, to walk the halls, to nod at the interns, to check in on old colleagues. His voice, still fragile, wasn't his greatest tool anymore, but his presence steady, open spoke volumes. One afternoon, in a team brainstorming session, someone asked for his input. He cleared his throat and leaned toward the mic in the center of the table. "I believe in this team," he said, the words broken but firm. "Keep building." The room went silent. Then someone clapped, then more. Not for the speech but for the effort, for the man who had once led with authority and now led with authenticity. After the meeting, a young employee he barely knew approached him. "I just wanted to say, when I started here, I was kind of scared of you, but today, I saw something else." Daniel smiled. Later that evening, he sat in Lena's office and told her about it. "I spoke at work," he said slowly. She beamed. "And how did it feel?" He hesitated, then wrote down a single word: "Real." Lena leaned back. "You've come far, Daniel, but there's still more ahead." He nodded. He knew, because while he had reclaimed pieces of his voice and reconnected with his family, there was still one place he hadn't gone back to, his father's grave. There were things left, unsettled wounds that needed tending. Not to rewrite the past, but to release it. He didn't know what he would say when he got there, but for the first time in his life, Daniel knew that saying something, even a whisper, mattered more than saying nothing at all. The morning Daniel decided to visit his father's grave, the sky was gray, thick with summer clouds that threatened rain but hadn't yet delivered it. It suited the mood, heavy, expectant, filled with the kind of silence that asks for something to be said. He drove alone, no driver, no assistant, just him, the road, and the soft rumble of an old playlist he hadn't touched in years. The farther he got from the city, the quieter the world became. The cemetery was just outside his hometown, a sleepy stretch of land nestled between two hills, where trees leaned like listeners and the wind carried whispers. He hadn't been there in over a decade. Finding the grave wasn't hard. He remembered the path, the tall oak near the back, the modest stone that read Thomas Mercer, devoted father and husband. The irony of those words still sat uneasily with him. Daniel stood for a while, hands in his pockets, the wind tugging gently at his jacket. He cleared his throat. The word cracked. He tried again. "I didn't come before, I couldn't." His voice, soft and hesitant, faded into the breeze. He knelt slowly, fingers tracing the edge of the stone. "You weren't easy," he whispered, "but I know you tried." He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't deliver some grand monologue like in the movies, but he stayed there for an hour, saying things his father would never hear, forgiving him for things he never apologized for, owning the weight of their unfinished story. And when he left, he felt lighter, not healed completely, but no longer carrying someone else's silence inside him. That night, he had dinner with Ella and Jonah. He told them where he'd gone and why. Jonah was quiet, listening. Ella reached over and held his hand. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said. "Not just for going, but for choosing to go." Daniel smiled. He still didn't always have the words, but they were starting to come back to him, not just in speech, but in presence, in action, in heart. He continued therapy with Lena. Their sessions grew deeper beyond mechanics of speech and into the layers of what voice really meant. Not just the sound you make, but the truths you choose to share, the parts of yourself you stop hiding. "Do you feel like you've said what you needed to?" she asked one day. Daniel shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "But I know who I need to say it to." She raised an eyebrow. "My kids," he said softly. "But not just them. My wife." Lena's expression softened. "What would you say, if you could?" He picked up the marker and wrote on the whiteboard, "I'm sorry. I see now. I wasn't there, not really." Lena nodded. "Then start with that." And so, he did. The next weekend, Daniel invited Claire, Jonah, and Ella to sit with him in the living room. No phones, no distractions, just them. He held a note in his hand, but didn't read from it. "I owe you an apology," he began. "For the years I put work first, for being a stranger in my own home, for not hearing until I lost the ability to speak." Claire blinked back tears. Jonah looked down. Ella sat still. "I don't want to be that man anymore," Daniel said. "If you let me try." Silence. Then Claire took a breath. "We've been waiting to hear that for a long time." They didn't hug right away. They didn't magically fix what had broken, but something opened that night, a door that had stayed shut for far too long. A beginning. If you're still here, thank you for listening to Daniel's story. These moments of reconnection, of reflection, can change everything. If you believe in second chances and quiet courage, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you won't want to miss where this healing journey goes. Weeks passed. The days grew warmer, and with them, something inside Daniel thawed as well. His voice had not fully returned. It likely never would not, in the way it once boomed in boardrooms or commanded attention in interviews. Now, it trembled, it cracked, but it was real. And for the first time in his life, Daniel began to realize that sometimes the quietest voices held the most truth. He started speaking more freely at home. Short sentences, gentle pauses. Sometimes he needed to write, but more and more, he simply tried. And when the words faltered, his family waited. They listened. They gave him the room to be imperfect. One evening, he and Ella sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft purples and orange. She was scrolling through her phone, then set it aside. "I was thinking," she began, "about applying to Columbia again." Daniel turned, eyebrows raised. "I didn't tell you before," she said, "but I got waitlisted last year. I didn't push it. I guess I was afraid you'd talk me out of it." He blinked. Then, slowly, shook his head. "Why would I?" Ella gave a small laugh. "Because before all this, you never really believed in anything outside of spreadsheets and schedules. You didn't talk to me about dreams. You just asked about my 5-year plan." Daniel smiled, almost sadly. "Maybe I didn't know how." She looked at him. "But you do now." He took a deep breath. Then, "Apply. I believe in you." Ella reached for his hand and squeezed it. "Thanks, Dad." There it was, again, that warmth, that connection. It was no longer rare. It was becoming normal. Still, not everything had healed. Claire, for one, remained cautious. Though she no longer pulled away when he reached for her hand, she also didn't fully lean in. "Trust," she'd said, "takes time to rebuild, especially after years of feeling unseen." And Daniel understood. He didn't try to fix it quickly. He didn't try to convince her. He simply stayed. Present, gentle, showing up for things he used to forget, like Jonah's school presentation, or the little book Claire had been writing in secret for months. He found it one night, half open on the kitchen counter, a journal. It wasn't locked. And for a moment, Daniel hovered, wondering if he had a right to peek. In the past, he wouldn't have hesitated. But this time, he closed the cover carefully and placed it where she'd find it. Later that evening, she asked, "Did you read it?" He shook his head. "Didn't need to." Claire studied him for a long time. Then she said quietly, "Thank you." They sat in silence after that, the kind that didn't ask for more. Lena noticed the change. In their next session, she asked, "Do you feel like yourself again?" Daniel tilted his head. "No," he answered. "I feel like someone Better, she smiled. That's the first time you've answered without pausing. He grinned. I guess I'm finding my rhythm. Then, let's keep going, Lena said. There's still more of you to discover. As the session ended, Daniel looked around her office, at the shelves lined with books, the calm tones, the soft light pouring in from the window. I think, he said, voice low but steady, I'd like to speak publicly, again, not about business, about this. Lena raised an eyebrow. Your story. He nodded, not to impress, to help. That was the moment it became clear. Daniel wasn't trying to return to who he used to be. He was stepping forward into someone new, and this time, his voice, however fragile, was entirely his own. The invitation came unexpectedly from a local wellness summit, focused on mental health, resilience, and healing through adversity. A former colleague, now organizing the event, had heard about Daniel's journey through the grapevine. You don't need to give a long speech, she said. Just share what it's been like. I think people would really listen. Daniel sat, with the email for hours. The stage was familiar to him, but not this kind of stage. He wasn't pitching a startup, unveiling a product, or addressing investors. This would be different. This would be personal. He wrote Lena that night. Do you think I'm ready? Her reply came minutes later. You've already started speaking. You're just choosing a bigger room now. So, he said yes. The day of the summit arrived quietly. No fanfare. Just a modest auditorium at a community center, a few rows of chairs, a small podium, and a microphone. There were therapists, teachers, parents, survivors, ordinary people with extraordinary stories. Daniel sat in the second row, quietly observing as the speaker before him, a young woman in her 20s, told a harrowing tale of recovering from a traumatic brain injury. Her voice trembled, but she smiled through it, and when she finished, the applause felt like rain on dry earth. Then came his turn. He walked up slowly, adjusting the mic. His notes were in his hand, but he didn't read them. He took a breath. I used to speak for a living, he began, his voice gravelly. I thought words were my power. Then, I lost them. A hush fell over the room. 6 months ago, I had surgery on my throat. I was told I might not speak again. At first, I panicked, not because I loved talking, but because I didn't know who I was without it. He paused, letting the silence do its work. But what I found was this: losing my voice helped me hear things I'd ignored. My wife's exhaustion, my kid's quiet longing, my own guilt. A woman in the back dabbed at her eyes. Someone near the front nodded slowly. I spent years speaking at people, and not enough time listening to them, especially the ones I loved. Daniel's voice cracked then. He let it. But I've learned that healing doesn't come when you get everything back the way it was. Healing comes when you start showing up fully present, even if imperfect. He looked down at his hands, then back at the audience. My voice may never sound the same, but the things I say with it, they matter more now. There was silence again, and then applause. Real, warm, steady applause, not for a polished performance, but for the truth in it. After the talk, people came up one by one, or in quiet pairs. Some thanked him, some shared a piece of their own story. One man, with a hearing aid and a cane, leaned in and said, "You reminded me that broken doesn't mean finished." Daniel held that sentence like a gift. That night, as he returned home, Claire met him at the door. She had watched the live stream. "You were honest," she said. "I'm proud of that." He smiled. "Me too." And when Ella showed him the social media clip that had begun circulating, he didn't feel embarrassed, just grateful. Jonah, quiet as always, simply handed him a drawing. It was stick figures, 4 of them, standing side by side. One of them had a little speech bubble. That read, "I'm here." Daniel placed it on the fridge. A week after the summit, Daniel received a message he didn't expect. It was from Ethan Chohe's former coup, the man who once stood by his side in every boardroom, who held the company together when Daniel disappeared. After the surgery, let's catch up. The message read, "There's something I'd like to talk to you about, something big." They met at a quiet cafe in the West End, the kind with reclaimed wood tables and warm Edison lights. Daniel arrived early, still getting used to navigating the world without rushing. Ethan came in 5 minutes late, looking exactly the same, well-tailored, confident, always a step ahead. "Damn," Ethan said, sitting down. "It's good to see you, Daniel." Daniel nodded with a quiet smile. "You too." They talked for a bit, updates, families, memories that felt like a lifetime ago. Then Ethan leaned forward. I want you back, he said. Daniel froze. Not in the same role, Ethan added quickly. But as an advisor, we're restructuring. We need someone who knows the soul of the company. Someone the board respects. And frankly, someone who's been through the fire. Daniel stayed quiet. I know you've changed, Ethan said. I've seen the videos, and I'm not asking you to bury that. I'm saying bring it with you. Let it guide us. Daniel looked down at the table. Part of him, some familiar, restless piece was tempted. The thrill, the influence, the idea of being needed again in a professional space. But there was another voice now, quieter but firmer. What's the time commitment? He asked. Ethan hesitated. 2, maybe 3 days a week. Some travel. We'd work around your recovery. And you'd be well compensated. It sounded reasonable, almost manageable. But Daniel had learned something in the silence of his own healing. Every yes came at the cost of something else. I'll think about it, he said honestly. When he got home that night, Claire was reading on the couch. Jonah was already asleep. Ella was in her room editing a college essay. He told Claire about the offer. She listened, then asked, "What does your gut say?" Daniel laughed softly. "That I miss who I used to be, but I also don't want to be him again." She nodded. "Then maybe it's not about going back. Maybe it's about asking if this version of you can exist in that world." He turned her words over in his mind. The next day he met with Lena and told her everything. She didn't offer advice, just questions. What would saying yes give you? He paused. A sense of relevance, legacy, and what might it take away? Daniel thought longer. Time, energy, clarity. Lena leaned forward. "Can you have both?" "I don't know," he said, "but I want to try, without losing what matters now." That weekend, he took Ella out for lunch, just the two of them. She told him about a boy she liked. He didn't interrupt, didn't overstep, just listened. Jonah showed him a game he'd coded in Python. Daniel didn't understand most of it, but he watched every line of logic his son explained, nodding with real interest. Claire invited him to a reading of her manuscript. Her story centered on a woman who lost everything and found herself in the quiet things she had ignored. Daniel cried during one chapter. She didn't say anything, just took his hand and squeezed out. By Sunday night, he had made a decision. He texted Ethan, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not ready to step back into that world, not if it means stepping away from what I've found. I'm still building something here, something that lasts." Ethan replied simply, "I understand, you've changed. That's a good thing." Daniel set the phone down and exhaled. He didn't feel regret, just peace. He went to bed early, wrapped in the warmth of a home that no longer felt like a hotel, and in that quiet, he dreamed not of boardrooms or profits but of conversations that mattered, dinners that lingered, and a voice that spoke not to impress, but to connect. It started with a letter, not an email, not a message, but a real, handwritten letter in a soft cream envelope, with his name in cursive across the front. It was from his brother, Mark. Daniel stared at it for a long time before opening it. He hadn't spoken to Mark in nearly 5 years, not since their father's funeral. They had left that graveside with silence between them, both too proud and too hurt to bridge the years of distance and misunderstanding. He finally unfolded the note. "I saw your talk from the summit. I didn't expect it to hit me like it did, but it did. I've spent years telling myself you were selfish, too busy for real family. Maybe some of that was true, but maybe some of it was just easier than admitting I missed you. If you're open to it, I'd like to see you. There's still time to not let this be how the story ends." Mark. Daniel read the letter again and again. The last time they were in a room together, they'd barely spoken. Years of comparison, resentment, and grief had kept them on opposite ends of their shared childhood. Daniel had always chased ambition. Mark had stayed behind, taking care of their ailing father. They both thought they were right, and maybe they both were, just in different ways. He showed the letter to Lena. "What do you want to say to him?" she asked. Daniel thought, then wrote on a notepad, "I want to say I'm sorry, but also, I want to ask if he ever was, too." Lena nodded. "Then maybe it's time to say both." They met the following weekend at a park near their old neighborhood. Daniel arrived first. The wind rustled the trees gently. He stood near the edge of the lake, watching ducks drift by on the still water. Mark appeared 10 minutes later, hands in his pockets, wearing the same weathered jacket he always wore when they were kids. Neither spoke at first. Then Mark said quietly, "You look different." Daniel smiled. Feel different too. They sat on a bench overlooking the lake, silence stretching between them, but not the cold kind. It felt like a bridge under construction. I wasn't fair to you, Mark said finally. I thought you abandoned us. Daniel nodded, his voice slow but firm. And I thought, you resented me for leaving. Maybe we both were right, but we were wrong too. Mark sighed, eyes wet. He asked about you a lot. Toward the end, Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't know. I didn't want to tell you, Mark admitted. I wanted you to feel what I felt. But he wasn't mad. You know, he just missed you. The weight of it landed like a stone in Daniel's chest. I've been carrying guilt, Daniel said. Not just about Dad, about you. About what? I didn't say what I didn't hear. Mark looked at him, really looked. You're not the only one who's changed, Dan. They sat there for a long time, watching the sky shift from blue to orange. And in that silence, healing happened, not with dramatic declarations or perfect apologies, but with presence, with both of them simply being there, choosing to stay, before they parted. Mark reached into his jacket pocket. I found this when cleaning out Dad's desk, he said, handing Daniel a photo. It was of the two of them, as boys, Daniel with a plastic microphone in his hand, Mark pretending to be his audience. I guess you were always meant to speak, Mark said with a grin. Daniel smiled. And maybe you were always meant to listen. They laughed. As Mark walked away, Daniel felt a deep ache ease inside him. Later that evening, he told Claire what had happened. She held him, no words needed. He texted Lena, I spoke to my brother today. We forgave each other. She replied, with a single sentence, that's the kind of voice that changes everything. The first time Daniel stood alone on a stage after his surgery, he was terrified, not because of the audience he had faced crowds of thousands before, but because this time, his voice wasn't the same. It came slower, softer, measured, vulnerable, and that made it more real than it had ever been. Months had passed since the summit, and he'd turned down more offers than he could count. Consulting gigs, book deals, podcast interviews. Instead, he chose what nourished him. Time with Claire, laughter with Ella and Jonah, Sunday dinners with Mark, and long, thoughtful sessions with Lena, who eventually encouraged him to start something of his own. It was Claire who first suggested it. You don't have to go back to who you were, she told him one morning over coffee. But maybe you can take what you've learned and offer it to people who need it most. And so he began mentoring not CEOs, not aspiring titans, but people in transition, burnt-out teachers, widowed parents, college students who felt lost, veterans learning how to live outside a uniform, people searching for their voice again in all its meanings. He called the program Resonate. It wasn't big, no press releases, no six-figure launches, just circles of people in rooms, virtual or real, speaking truth and listening deeply. And one evening, as a small group gathered in a community center in Chicago, Daniel asked them to do something simple. Write a letter, he said, to someone who changed your life, or to someone you never got to thank, or forgive, or let go of. They all began to write. So did Daniel. His letter was to himself. Dear Daniel, you chased applause because you were afraid silence meant failure. You sought power because you thought love had to be earned. You lost your voice to find something deeper. You found a family that waited for you to stop running. You found a brother who forgave without needing reasons. You found a partner who stayed, and you found yourself not in titles or noise but in quiet truth. You learned that saying I'm sorry is not weakness, it's healing. You learned that the most important voice is the one that can say, I'm still here, you are here, and that's enough. He folded the letter and placed it in a small box with the others. Later that night, as he walked home through crisp autumn air, Daniel stopped at a park bench near the old lake, the one where he and Mark had made peace. He closed his eyes and let the silence wrap around him, not as something to fear, but something sacred. The wind was gentle. The trees whispered. His voice, once fragile, now firm, spoke softly into the dark. Thank you, he said, to no one in particular, and maybe to everything, and the world, in its quiet way, seemed to say it back. If this story moved you, leave a comment and share it with someone who might need it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more healing stories every week. What would your letter to the past say?